everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Heart of Law podcast. On the podcast today, I have invited someone who inspires me as a woman and a mother and a business owner. She's fierce, and she's wise, and she's going places. Her name is Ilya Lerma. Ilya received a law degree from the University of Arizona in 1999. She's a solo practitioner in Phoenix, Arizona, where she focuses on representing brain-injured and catastrophically injured victims. She became an instructor for the Trojan Horse Method in 2017 and subsequently became a national trial consultant and witness preparation consultant for trial structure in 2018. Ilya, welcome to the show. It's good to have you here.
Thank you, Mirena. I appreciate that intro. It was really nice. Almost didn't sound like me.
It is. It's how I feel about you.
That's great to do.
You know, I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you, Ilya, as a person. I mean, you are a breath of fresh air, and in the sense that you don't fit any mold that I know. You are unconventional, dedicated to awaken from the old programming. Whether it is in your line of work or life, you practice being conscientious. You trust your instinct, and you use your work as a way to master healing for those you represent and for yourself. You are what I call the new age lawyer. So it's very refreshing to be able to invite you on the podcast and have this conversation, because I do feel like we are on the same wavelength.
Well, thank you so much for that.
So let's start at the very beginning. Tell me about yourself. Where were you born and raised? Where is your family from?
I was born in a very small border town called Douglas, right on the border between Arizona and Mexico. My mother was a teacher. She was a stay-at-home mom, worked in my father's law office for a number of years, and then went on to school and became a teacher. My father was a lawyer. He was one of the last great general practitioners, and then later became judge in a neighboring county. And then my family later moved there when I graduated from high school.
Oh, wow. So what I did know a little bit about your father was that you shared with me he was a seeker and a mystic. Tell me a little bit more about that.
As long as I can remember, my father was filling his bookshelves with Carl Jung, and we had every spiritual self-help psychology range of book you could think of. His bookshelf looked a lot like yours, only it was stacked to the top and not nearly as neat. He had Immanuel Kant. He had writings from all the great philosophers, David Hume, the empiricists, the rationalists, you name it. And but he also struggled a lot in his past with addiction. He was in recovery for a number of years. So I also grew up with a lot of spirituality regarding my exposure to Al-Anon. And then, of course, we were raised Catholic. The community that I grew up in was very heavily religious. So I had this very wide base, and someone who was always reading. My father, I remember for a time, was learning how to meditate and working on self-improvement himself. And it was a good example for me to see that someone who struggled with his own imperfections never gave up the desire to better himself. And so that was an excellent model for me.
Wow, how lucky.
Yeah, it was. He did give me Immanuel Kant to read, by the way, in like the 9th grade when I told him I was bored. So I learned very quickly I better learn how to read and understand what I'm reading, or not get bored.
Yeah. So did you choose to be a lawyer because your father was a lawyer?
No, as a matter of fact, my father said, Neha, please do something else. He didn't love it. It was very stressful. My father handled a number of high-profile cases, capital murder cases. And like I said, he was sort of one of the last great general practitioners. So he also did divorces and civil litigation, contract disputes. But he didn't love it. It was very, very stressful for him back in those days. And he actually said, don't do this, pick something else. And my original plan was to be a neurosurgeon. I have a brother with an intractable seizure disorder. And I grew up around neurologists and neuropsychologists and neurosurgeons. And so there was a lot of talk of brain health and, brain damage and the medicine that surrounded all of that. And so that was my original course. Because my brother was having a number of seizures at the time that it was time for me to go to school, I ended up delaying my enrollment to a pre-med program at Marquette University. And I ended up going to Northern Arizona University, where I fell in love with the philosophy department. And I just absolutely loved it. I didn't want to leave. But I also realized the difficulty in getting a PhD in philosophy didn't prepare you for a lot of jobs unless you wanted to teach, which wasn't really in my plans. So after NAU and a philosophy degree, I thought, well, I'll just take the LSAT and see what happens. And it kind of rolled from there.
Did you enjoy law school, or was it just something you're trying to get through?
Candidly, I hated it. I hated it. I hated law school. I didn't love the people that I was with. I think a lot of that was me. I did not develop much of a community. I did meet my best friend there, though, so I was really glad for that. One of my best friends, at least, she's been as close to a lifelong friend as I could ever hope for.
Yeah.
But no, I hated law school. Hated it.
Did you think that once law school was done that you're going to be out in the profession and you're going to find your calling and it was going to be, a smooth sail from there? Was it, or what happened?
Well, I think I kept convincing myself, well, you're here. Lots of people struggle to get in law school. I didn't. I was very fortunate. I had great grades and, some very strong letters of recommendation from my professors in the philosophy department. But I kept kind of making deals with myself, like just get through the first year and then get through the second year. And then, well, maybe, you're almost done. And I actually finished a semester early. And I did sort of think I wouldn't last. I knew that the turnover, that a lot of people do graduate with a law degree who don't necessarily go on to practice law. And I thought I would be one of those statistics, but I gave myself 1 year to figure out exactly what I needed. And then if I didn't know after a year, then I gave myself the permission to leave it if I didn't love it.
Wow. That's a really cool way to negotiate with yourself, right? Because most people I don't think I really understood that concept until much, much later in life. But to negotiate yourself is to try and keep yourself motivated to accomplish sometimes things that you're not necessarily passionate about, right?
Certainly.
Wow, that's amazing. One thing that we have in common is that thirst to transcend, the ideology that doesn't serve us. And that's why it's been so wonderful connecting with you. And we've talked about investing our energy in creating deliberately, right? Tell me a little bit about your journey of self-discovery. How did it start for you? It sounds like it started from the very beginning.
Yeah, I'd have to say it did. Being the daughter of a seeker and a thinker, my father thought very considerably on the nature of existence and the nature of humans. And he read a lot of Eric Fromm, to have or to be. And so I think it started with that exposure, the fact that he was someone who wanted to look beyond just our day-to-day grind and find out what does existence mean? And he looked for it in a lot of ways. He looked for it in books. And even though I don't think he believed in the institution of church, he made sure that we had a spiritual background so that later in life we could develop that if that was a connection that was meaningful to us. Yeah. So I think I went through two phases. One was after I had been practicing law for a couple of years and had been in a very tumultuous marriage that ended. And there was a lot of maturity that came as a result of that. Most of it, I would say, psychological, recognizing that I was repeating unhealthy codependent patterns that I had developed and was living out. Mm-hmm. And so that emerging from that first marriage with a better lens towards self-development and knowing how important that was. When I went through a second phase of that after the birth of my two daughters, I was prepared at that time to finally say the way I was white knuckling life wasn't the way I wanted to see out the next several decades. So I decided that I hit a period of time in my second marriage. Mm-hmm. And I thought, these were two very different people that you married. And you're the common denominator. So, you can blame your partners all you want, or you can figure out what it is you need to do to fix yourself, to get on a path that's going to give you some meaning so that you don't keep repeating these unhealthy patterns. And so that's kind of when it hit. I was about, I want to say maybe 8 years into the practice of law by the time it really knocked me on my butt.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess suffering is, pain, and suffering is usually the trigger for wanting to kind of uncover what's beneath the layers. So would you say that those are the defining moments in your life, or have there been instances where you really had to pause because you didn't have a reaction for them? You're trying to see what the lesson was in those defining moments. Was it the marriage and having children, or was there something between you trying to practice law, trying to become this lawyer, a powerful woman lawyer, but also trying to keep a family and, serve a family?
Boy, I would say that there were certainly triggers, but I'd always had this sense that things needed to be different.
Yeah.
And when I watched The Matrix for the first time, there was the quote, the splinter in the mind. And that's how I felt. I felt very much like I was going through life, living the motions and going through those motions, but not feeling terribly connected to self. And I was living out these roles of, by this time I was partner in my law firm. I was married. I had 2 children. I had sort of ticked off the boxes of this is everything you're supposed to do in your mid-30s.
Yeah.
And I still felt wildly restless. And I didn't know why. Why am I not happy? I mean, I was sort of outwardly happy, but inwardly I felt a stirring, and I knew that a time was coming that I needed to reckon with myself, because I was sort of putting on the hat of being the perfect parent. I'm volunteering at school like crazy. I'm the room mom for my kids' preschool class, and I'm trying to volunteer behind the snack bar, and I'm trying to be the perfect partner and the perfect wife and the perfect mom. It felt very
consuming.
Yeah, very consuming. I was very, very frustrated and completely unfulfilled. And it's not like I didn't love my family and love the opportunity to do those things, but I became deeply restless in myself because there were things within me that were not being fulfilled. I was living out these sort of roles for everyone else and wasn't doing anything to nurture my inner spirit.
So what was missing?
Well, it turns out that it was that relationship to self. When things began to collapse, and this was really, it was funny and in a way a little bit scary. When I was home with my daughter, I was fortunate. I was partner in my firm, and so I had opportunities to be able to work from home, and so I had a lot of flexibility that women in our profession with children don't have. But I was able to work from home a lot. I cut back my work schedule significantly. And there was a period of time when I thought I might be developing a mental illness because I was thinking constantly. Mm-hmm. It was like my brain would not shut off as I'm making the beds, as I'm getting the girls, breakfast together, as I'm cleaning the house. And I'm, it was like the voices in my head were so incredibly loud. And mental illness, unfortunately, has affected my family. And so I began to get concerned that there was something very seriously wrong with me. And I started thinking about going back to church. I had left my religious upbringing many, many years ago. I started looking for any guru. I started meditating. I started reading anything I could get on sort of quieting the mind. And what I realized is that's everybody.
Yeah.
I just hadn't been alone and been still enough to actually be conscious of it. And now I was home with my daughter. First it started with when I just had the one. And we know how busy you are as a mom. Right? Mm-hmm. Your children aren't as old as mine, but I remember. And there was a stillness in my day that I had never had. It was like so much quiet. And I was starting to hear myself and what I would normally go through the day. But of course, I'm answering phone calls, writing demand letters, and trying to settle cases, and I'm running a law practice and taking care of kids. When that, narrowed, I could hear myself, and I thought I was going mad.
Yeah.
It was terrifying. It was terrifying.
Yeah. I guess I feel like a lot of people go through this, but people don't have the tools or the means to really to think that maybe that is a calling that you need to, wake up to your true self, to your higher self. And a lot of people do embrace religion and anchor themselves in that. And, everybody believes in what they believe for their own personal reasons. But I do remember going through that stage, and I do remember thinking there was something wrong, that who I was attracting and what I was doing was because there was something wrong with me. And then there was also like perhaps some shame or, the cultural residue or, anything that came from the past that, I hadn't really listened to or paid attention to, but it was suddenly really clear, and it was affecting the way that I felt about myself and other people. Especially, I would catch myself judging other people, and then I would see how I would judge myself, and it was cruel. It was really cruel. and so I sympathize with that so much. What is your message to those attorneys who are in the thick of it right now, who are, early, mid-30s, they're building families, they're trying to really position themselves well in their career, but they're struggling because there is not enough time in the day to spend with yourself? Like, what's your message to them?
I'll tell you the words that really changed my life. And they came from a close friend of mine who had kind of introduced me to a little bit of what you're talking about in terms of what we're attracting. But what I was complaining one day about the law practice, and at the time, my partner and I we were married. So we were having some disagreements about how the firm should operate, and our growth projections and the direction of the firm. And so there were a lot of things there. And he said these words to me. He said, "So what are you going to do about it?" Mm-hmm. And he followed it up by saying, "I've been listening to you for a couple of months now, and you've got lots of complaints, and you've got lots of blame that you're putting on other people." Mm-hmm. And he said, "But you are responsible for where you have put yourself and what you will tolerate. And if you want out of these circumstances, then you better acknowledge that you're the one who has the 100% of the blame for where you are. Mm-hmm. And I left that conversation like really offended. I was like, you know, he doesn't know my life, and I haven't told him everything, and how dare he? And then that night, I don't think I slept at all, because I thought he's right. I made the choices that put my life here. Mm-hmm. I chose, to structure the partnership the way we had, and I had defaulted a lot of decisions to my partner and my husband, mm-hmm. And ended up sort of where I was. And if I was going to change it, I needed to acknowledge that my life was a mess because I allowed it to be. Maybe I didn't make every single decision, but even a default decision is a decision, and surrendering your choices to somebody else to dictate your life only means that you then have someone to blame when your life doesn't turn out the way you want it to. Yeah. And that was a big, big wake-up call for me. So my advice is, if your life doesn't look like you want it to, own it 100%. It's your responsibility. You can blame spouses, you can blame former teachers, you can blame your kids, you can blame circumstances, your job, but you will never have the power to be able to change it until you acknowledge that it's 100% yours. And that's when my life began to turn around.
Wow. Yeah, I think it's easy to blame it on other people. I mean, it's easy because we somehow feel like children are like victims to ourselves.
Right.
It's like, why? I am innocent. I didn't do anything, or if I did, it wasn't intentional, and so people should just assume that I'm a good person. And if they don't, they're horrible people. Yeah. So as your life is unfolding, did you start practicing meditation on a regular basis, and did that stabilize your state? Or you start to feel alignment, or was that something that built up over time? Or was it just like you woke up and you're like, wow, I have to change this?
I wish it had been that it had this miraculous effect on me. The truth is, my journey has been a number of years, and especially with meditation. Meditation, I did it on and off for 6 years before it finally kicked in. And I was like, oh, wow, I think this is working. The first few years were rough. I was inconsistent. I was in my head a lot. I had these goals, about how I wanted to be this sort of spirit guide, and my ego was all involved in the whole thing. So no, it wasn't a magical transformation, but I did sort of subscribe to the fake it until you make it philosophy. I started putting into play a lot of ideas. This is when I became exposed to Dr. Dispenza, who I know you're familiar with, very much more so than me. But I started, going to seminars on positive thinking, positive attraction, the law of attraction. I saw Abraham Hicks. There was literally self-development everywhere. It was in my ears at the gym. It was in my car on the way to work. It was in my ears again at night when I was trying to go to sleep. I got rid of everything I could think of that was toxic. I ended toxic relationships. I stopped participating in mom gossip, which, I mean, I don't know what your experience was, but my experience with moms is those are some of the most judgmental, gossipy people on the planet. Yeah. And I allowed myself to get sucked into that. So I put an end to that. Yeah. I gave up alcohol for 6 years. I didn't have a drop of alcohol. I gave up pork and chicken and red meat. I was almost full vegetarian, and then later did become vegetarian and vegan. I've since gone back, but for some health reasons, I eat a little bit of meat. But that was a period of time. It was like, I don't know if this works, but I'm so desperate to not be up here in my mind all the time. I'm just going to do it all. Yeah. And so I was meditating, listening to stuff in the car, and I'm changing my diet and getting rid of all these, toxic habits. And it worked. You know, it's at one point, there was one day where I was like, holy cow, there's a shift in me. I feel happy. Mm-hmm. But it was not anywhere close to overnight, as you can imagine. That was a period of years that it took to commit to that and see it through.
So break this down for me a little bit more, because I'm in the thick of it too, as we've talked about it before. And I try to listen, and I try to listen to the inner voice and the inner thoughts, and then kind of work with myself gently to shift, because I like get very busy and life takes over. And then 4 or 5 days later, I just feel completely off, depleted, consumed, restless. And then I know I'm like, I should have continued my routine. I would have been fine. So how do you bring yourself back, or what is it that you feel? How does that misalignment feel like for you before you do something about it?
You know, now it's different. Now it's like you. It's only a few days before I'm like, oh, I'm really not doing the things I need to be doing before I get back to it. A lot of people, you know, they'll schedule yoga and they'll, you know, I have to do this. And I got, let me explain something that happened last year during COVID. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm gonna have to go back before that. So this might be like kind of a long answer. In 2018 and 2019, I faced the most difficult financial years of my life. They had started in 2015, 2017. I settled a few large cases, and it bought me a little bit of time, but things were incredibly stressful. And I started my practice on a shoestring. I had not planned, and you know, the plaintiff's practice, we advance costs. So I'm putting out money I barely had, and sometimes didn't even have, in order to fund the cases that I had, which were fairly significant. Mm-hmm. And then in 2019 is when I became an instructor for trial structure. But in 2018 and 2019, I'm traveling all over the country. I'm lecturing to states associations for justice. I'm consulting for both on the trials for trial structure, which wasn't its independent thing yet, but also for Trojan Horse. And I just had all these obligations of trying to get things, you know, both my practice and the consulting side off the ground. And I was so incredibly stressed. I had, you know, 3 days of travel. I'd come home, pack a bag, and then I had 4 days of travel after that. And that's kind of how the year went. Well, in 2019, I broke 4 ribs in a really bad fall in my home. And it devastated my practice because because of where I was building the consulting, my cash flow was all, you know, jacked up. And so I ended up sending out all of the pre-litigation in my firm and about half of the litigation, which wasn't a ton, but still 3/4 of the cases in my firm I just sent out because I needed to find homes for them while I rehabbed my ribs. I actually needed surgery. Which most people think you break your ribs and there's nothing that can be done. Mine were broken off, and so I had to have surgery. And so it was not all 4 of them, just only 2. But still, it was a long, painful process. So what happens is I'm involved in a personal lawsuit in 2019. It wasn't malpractice, thank goodness, but that resolves on the last day of 2019. December 31st was when we signed the final paperwork. We came to an agreement, but that was very symbolic for me that 2020 was going to look different. You and I pay attention to signs and that kind of thing. So the end of the year meant a lot. So then in 2020, I'm like exhaling, like the lawsuit is over. It's starting to look like my consulting is picking up. Things with the practice are picking up. I'm finally better with my ribs. I'm back to exercising. And then COVID hits and I'm stuck at home. And it was like my body went, and I had nothing. I started developing symptoms. One of my parents, my mother has a low thyroid condition. And I started having this. And I thought, why? I don't smoke. I don't, I'm vegetarian. I meditate, I do yoga, I should be having all this stuff happen to me. And I, kind of indignant about the whole thing. But I think what had happened was my adrenals were just shot. I'd had such a cortisol draw for 2.5 years that it just literally fried my hormones, my thyroid especially. And so my body was all out of whack. So this is finally answering the question. In this window, I finally learned how to give myself some grace. I put on weight. I wasn't exercising every day. There were some days I went to bed and I was just in tears because I felt so bad and so exhausted. I didn't even know how I was going to get through. And I gave myself permission to feel terrible. And I finally just said, it's okay. I started talking to myself for the first time in my life. We hear this, talk to yourself as you would a friend. I finally started doing that. I finally started saying, it's okay. It'll come back. You just need to nurture. I went to see an acupuncturist and a functional medicine doctor, and I got myself on a nice, detox plan, and I started rehabbing from the inside out. And that's when, because of COVID, I started really deeply meditating. I started doing more yoga instead of hitting my treadmill or, going to my exercise with the Pilates classes. I just started working out. And of course, COVID, most gyms were closed anyway, so it was perfect time. But that's really what got me through, was the ability to finally say, you don't have to do it all today. I can now look back in my almost late 40s and say, as long as you get back up, like the Japanese saying, 6 times down, 7 times up. And I kept saying, just get up. You just got to beat it by one more time. And that's it. I mean, it's kind of simple, but it's taken me a lifetime to learn. Just keep getting back up.
Yeah. So I assume that meditation and the practice that you have now has spilled over to every aspect of your life. So you're the mom of 2 beautiful girls. They're, teenagers now. You also have your own practice and you're, more dedicated than ever. Tell me how that has spilled into other aspects of your life and how you, if you are finding the pleasure and the joy in every moment versus having these goals of what you should make for the year or what your kids should be good at and, their grades and things like that.
Well, I'll start with my kids because honestly, I think my journey to becoming more self-aware and much more of a conscious being has shown itself more in my parenting than anything else. And I'm most happy that I made the switch in time to minimize the damage to them. And, I was in a community of good meaning folks who, we got to send our kids to the best schools and, my kids are going to private school. And I remember, my youngest daughter, her first day in preschool, and she comes back and the next day I pull out the uniform, I go to get her dressed and she goes, oh, I wore that yesterday. And I'm like, oh, you're going to have to get used to this, kiddo. But my other daughter, in about, I have a lid. Sorry, I have cats. My other daughter, in about the 3rd grade, she was always and both my kids great students, always. And I always told them, look, I don't care what your grades are. There's one grade that this school graded them on, and it was demonstrates best effort. And it was demonstrates best effort in English, demonstrates best effort in math. So I told them, as long as you've got A's there, we're good. I didn't show them their report card. I didn't reward them for good grades. I just told them what my expectations were. And that was an A in demonstrates. But about the 3rd grade, my oldest daughter began showing signs of anxiety. She was having difficulty sleeping. She was grinding her teeth at night. She would wake up thinking about not turning in homework. And it crushed me because I thought, this is not the life I want for my kids. To what end am I sending my kids to be this, this grade widget. And I talked to their father, who we were divorced by this time, but we had a and we still do have an excellent relationship. And I said, let's take her out. Let's put her someplace else. And, she went to one school, and then she went to a Montessori school where she just thrived. And being able to share with my children, where I've sort of taken my talents out of them and let them develop into the humans that they need to be. I think that's been my greatest reward from becoming conscious. Is my youngest daughter she is such an evolved being. I mean, this is a girl that I go to for advice. I mean, I don't go to many people, but I've been known to say, hey, listen, I need to pick your brain on something. And my 14-year-old is telling me, like, this is how I'm looking at the situation. So it's definitely started there, but also, I listened to the podcast that you did with Joe Fried, and he was talking about how, when through self-work, you begin to really see things as they are, and you remove all these layers. He didn't say of the ego, but that's kind of how I equated it. Mm-hmm. And that's really been true for me too, because now all of the pieces of my life kind of fit together. I can see my clients in new ways. Most of them have significant brain injuries, but I'm able to see them as people and not just clients. And I'm able to work with witnesses. I got a tremendous compliment from my colleague, Chuck Bennett, yesterday for a witness that I had worked with. And people are so complimentary, and they're like, gosh, you're so intuitive, and you're so this, and you're so, it's not really that. It's just that I have removed a lot of that head space, that head game, those voices, gotten rid of all of that so that I can really see and commune, right? Communicating is communing. Yes. And we forget that. And I feel like that's the biggest aspect, is not only do I commune with people, I commune with my children, but I have a communion within myself. Mm-hmm. And it's deeply gratifying.
Mm-hmm. So is it fair to say that you're practicing mindfulness and law? And are you using your profession as a way for you to refine the spiritual practice, the person that you are becoming?
I would say yes. If you look up anything that I've ever written, it's almost very frequently it's on alchemy of law, because one of the books I found in my father's bookshelf was a book that changed my life. And it was a book by C.C. Zane called Spiritual Alchemy. It was a tiny little book. And it talked about how, we have these ideas in Western society that alchemists were these charlatans, and they're trying to, turn the material world into gold, and they're, very material. And it wasn't that at all. The true high magicians, the true high priests who were studying alchemy were doing so because they understood something that I think our modern day struggles with. And that is that the material universe is a manifestation of the metaphysical universe. And so they thought by studying the refinement of hard elements and lower elements into gold, that they could understand the refinement into spirit and transcendence. And that to me is remarkable wisdom that has truly changed my life. And I look at my life, my law practice is like the alchemical furnace, right? The deadlines, the pressure, the opposing counsel, the insurance companies, like that's the furnace. And yet there's a refinement that happens. I mean, I take all of this evidence, or I take this really difficult witness, and through putting them through heat and pressure, we take them through, and adding a few things and taking a few things out, we refine to a better level. And to me, that's a perfect metaphor for life, because that's what I'm trying to do in my spirit. And so when I don't feel like doing something, I sort of hate the slog. But my friend Michelle Feeney likes that word, the slog of the practice of law. that's when I remind myself, this is part of your furnace. This is part of you becoming not just a better lawyer, not just a better human, but a truly spiritual being.
Yeah. So purifying your craft, purifying your soul in the process. I mean, some of the statements that I made earlier when we first started the podcast was that, you are truly, I think, the way that you are practicing law, it is like healing, healing another and healing yourself. And so you've taken on, in addition to practicing law and taking on these medical malpractice cases, to also consulting with law firms and teaching them how to do trial prep and how to help with, preparing for witness questioning. So how do you incorporate all of that when you're brought in and you're working on a case? And at what point do you have a conversation with yourself like, this isn't about me right now. I'm throwing all of my attention and my focus into my craft? And do you dance with that? And how do you really just show me how you go about doing what you do?
Gosh, I hate to say that it's a case by case, but truly the work that I do it's highly dependent on what the lawyer and the witness bring to the table. The more open that they are to the process, the more free I feel like I can be. So I heard from a witness that I helped. She was one of the very first. Her husband had been severely brain injured in a fall. In her presence, she was the first one to find him. And they were pretty newlywed at the time. So you can imagine the post-traumatic stress that she had. But she wrote to me just over the weekend, actually. I hadn't heard from her in a couple of years. And she just said that she was thinking about me and, how much I had started her on a path to healing. Now, I was a witness prep consultant, but I'm not a therapist. I don't counsel people, but I do walk them through a process in a very distinct way. And like you said earlier in the podcast, that I practice law sort of different than everybody else. And a lot of that is relying on my intuition that I have cultivated, right? I don't just hear voices or something. I really spent time getting to know my inner voice, my sense of things. And so when I always try to be as professional as possible, of course, but there are some things that I do that are a little unorthodox. I have, recommended to clients that they learn how to do earthing, take their shoes off and put their feet in the earth. And, meditation is a regular part of my recommendation for witness consultants, but also lawyers. And I think lawyers like Joe Reed was kind of mentioning, and I think this came out in Mr. Romano's podcast also, and that is that lawyers are beginning to recognize that authenticity is beneficial for them as lawyers, but it's also beneficial for them as humans. And that mindset helps me share some of the information that I have and kind of steer them in the right direction. So it's a broader question. So I hope I answered it.
Well, I did ask it. I tend to get lost in my own questions. So because I want to ask everything. But tell me more about the trial structures. What is it about for those who don't know, and how has it helped you, improve your practice?
Oh gosh, where do I begin? Trial structure is like a rabbit hole, because you're like Alice and you just dive in and you sort of meet all these incredible characters. Alejandro Blanco is the founder, and he's my mentor, but he's become my dear friend and colleague. We have cases together, and I have a profound amount of respect for his wisdom, which I didn't always have. I challenged him on a lot of things and have more than once had to come back to that humble place of, I'm really sorry I doubted you. So trial structure, for anyone who doesn't know, it was a method of taking plaintiff cases and streamlining them in such a way that we can begin to recognize patterns of how we are attacked, anticipate them, and prepare for them at trial. Mm-hmm. And once you have a structure, then you can use it for discovery in one of your cases. So what I like to say is that the defense has known for years that they're basically, they try the same case all the time. They're always saying the same thing. They're always saying, we didn't do it. It was somebody else's fault. And it's, what we did isn't that big of a deal because your client was messed up anyway, or, she had all these problems, or, we only hurt her a little bit. And so those are very predictable patterns in every single plaintiff case. And when I realized that they're doing so well, how many defense lawyers do we know that switch over to the plaintiff side because they think they're going to come over and make all this money and they get their butts handed to them? Yeah. And it's because they are used to winning. Well, they're winning because they get to ride a lot of the rhetoric and, the something for nothing and greedy plaintiff lawyers and all of that. And so trial structure is a way to level the playing field so that that's no longer what's in debate. It's a way of situating the case and organizing the information for its most powerful, persuasive delivery. And I have seen cases, it's the best testimonials always come because the lawyers come and they're like, we have this really difficult case and there's so much information, there's so many defenses, and the jury's going to get confused, and there's this and there's that, there's all these problems. And then at the very end, when we have a completed structure, the lawyer goes, do you think I'm asking for enough money? Do you think I could change my number? Because they sense the switch and the transformation of the cases. And it's a lot of work, but it's among the best work of my career. I absolutely, as Chuck and I say, we are both face down in the trial structure Kool-Aid.
So do you travel around the country now, working with other law firms, or how do you get the work?
Well, the work comes through, we do put on free webinars. We have one coming up on June 24. We put free webinars. And so we have students who are kind of regular followers of trial structure who come. We'll get some traffic through our website, trialstructure.com. And then a lot of it is word of mouth, or people who have been to our programs in the past. So for COVID, we've been doing everything by Zoom, including witness preparation, which is one of the services we offer through trial structure. But then also we do travel. I think everyone except Alejandro at this point is up for traveling and consulting. So that usually means that I fly into the home city. We spend 3, sometimes 4 days together. We break down a case, maybe do some witness prep. We do some preparation on the opening structure, and then I leave and hope to hear what the result is. Yeah. So do you live for that? I guess the email or the call that we nailed it, and it was incredible. I love it, and I hate to say this, but sometimes I'm a little disappointed when the call comes in that they settled the case and we didn't get to test the structure. But there was a call. This is a great story for me. It's a great story. There was a very good attorney here, David Shammy. He and my good friend Tanvir Shah were trying a wrongful death, a workers' compensation bad faith case in federal court in Arizona, in probably one of the most conservative courtrooms. The judge happens to be married to our county attorney. And it was an uphill battle for certain. They had a number of rulings against them. They had a lot of really good evidence that was excluded. And I had written the structure on that. I worked with their team, Cassidy Girardi, who was also part of the trial team. Which is, it's always great for me when you get to see, women part of the trial team. And anyway, David had apparently said, no, we don't need to hire her, we don't want to make this additional expense, and he was kind of grousing about it. I heard, he told me later, he gave me permission to tell the story. And when the verdict came in, now this is a case where they awarded only $300,000 in damages, and their award was $4.5 million, which is virtually unheard of in Arizona, and certainly unheard of in front of this judge. So the first call I got, I got a text message first, and then the second call was from David. I was his second call, I think, after his wife. And he said, I know, I doubted you. He said, I'm so thankful you were involved. The case looked really different. He gave me a lot of compliments about what a talented trial lawyer I was, but I truly credit trial structure with giving me, and Alejandro in particular, working this closely with him on a couple of trials, has given me an in-depth study, like I've got a $3 million education. So I just think it's just awesome when you see these cases just transform. I just live for it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds amazing, and I believe it. I think a lot of lawyers that continue to invest in their education for their profession continue to thrive and break their own records. But I'm not a lawyer, so I would be interested in knowing the answer to this. What is the difference between trial structures and Trojan horse or something else, the reptile, method? What is the difference between all of these methods that are being taught to lawyers around the country?
Well, I don't know if I'm the best person to answer because I haven't been to a lot of the other trial schools. I haven't even been to trial lawyer college, which I know a lot of people are. Joe Freed talked a lot about how it really transformed him, and he was an instructor. Alejandro was also an instructor for the trial lawyer college a number of years ago. And, I think there's definitely some overlap. What I know about our system is it's sort of a closed loop, right? It's its own internal molecule. And I didn't understand that when I first saw it. It took me some time in working with the structure before I recognized, holy cow, there's a lot here. And that's why I say it's a rabbit hole, because it's like you dive in, but it just keeps going. There's all these layers of standing inside that molecule. You can look at the opening statement and know where exactly you need to hit in closing. And if you change something in closing, you're going to have to change this over here. And if you change this in voir dire, you're going to have to change how you line this up in evidence. And when I started to see that, it was like, I called Chuck and I was like, do you realize how brilliant this structure is? And he's like, I've been telling you this for 6 months. So I would say, I think what makes us different is that I would say first we're systematized because it's the same for every case. I know we think as plaintiff lawyers, every case is different, every injury is different, this client, these problems, they're not. I've structured now, I have lost count. There's probably a couple hundred cases now that I've structured and they're all the same. I have yet to find one that doesn't fit the structure. And if you can develop patterns in your cases, in just this one, you learn you can apply it to the other cases in your firm. But when I saw that, I just got so excited because now I could be like the defense lawyers winning every case because I'm trying the same case every time. It's like Kyle Sherman says, we build a house and then we build the same house again, but we do the things a little bit better. And maybe we refine a couple of things on the third build and the fourth build. So it is a refinement. It is an alchemy that happens, an alchemical process that happens. And that's the part I think is it's just awesome because it's something that you can take from this case and apply it to every case. And it works in every case. And it's a soup to nuts, beginning to end roadmap of all of everything you need to do. And I don't know what the other schools teach, but that's what I think makes us different based on what I know.
Interesting. So we've talked about lawyers practicing from the mind, not the heart. So when you meet someone and they're very much in their head about a case, and you present them with the structure, do you feel that unless they get in their heart that it may not work? Or do you have to also sort of show the person the way of how to tune into this way, this methodology, I guess?
I think that's a great question. I think that, and I've seen it work with lawyers who are in their head 100%. You don't have to be, this great practitioner of mindfulness and emotional study and, who's Paul Ekman, Inside and Out, who wrote Emotions Revealed. I don't think you need to, you don't need that. We can write any skilled lawyer can take a structure and deliver it as it needs to be delivered. But I will say that if you commit to the study of trial structure and maybe do more than one or two programs, and you start to apply it, and you start to, because it's like a muscle, right? Your brain sort of gets used to looking at evidence and looking at cases this way. And so it gets stronger and stronger, and you go deeper into the rabbit hole. And that's where my truest reward has come out, is I can't wait to try my next case. I'm dying because I just keep getting more and more revealed about, the potential for using the trial structure method.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, all the people that I have met, that I've worked with throughout the years, I always see that the people who are the most inspiring, the most moving, that get the best results are people that are incredibly vulnerable, within who they are, but also about their client, because they've taken on the case. And they're completely invested, spiritually, mentally. And so I see that some of the best results come from these people that are really wearing their heart on their sleeve. But then I also see lawyers who are very structured and methodical in the way that they try cases, and they get great results. But I can tell that they're not in their heart. It's like the ego is strong and it's taken over. And I'm sure that you see this, right? And I'm sure there is a gray area in between, and people fall in all different, categories. But I do see, I think those as two extremes. And so how do you work with that when you see somebody is driven very much so by their ambition and their ego, and you're working with them? Do you try to kind of balance that energy, or how do you navigate that?
Honestly, no, I don't, because I feel like, I've been very fortunate to have guides in my life. I told you about my friend who gave me the one question that changed my life. And I have since had a number, and Alejandro among them, who've kind of helped me become more refined in my alchemical journey.
Yeah.
And so I think people have to want it, just because they encounter me. I do very strongly believe that people don't encounter me unless they are seeking something. Mm-hmm. But I don't look at it as my job to make everybody better. I don't fancy myself this great guru. I have some great information that if you want it, I will share it all day long. Yeah. But I'm still a deeply flawed human. I still struggle a lot with my own ego, which isn't even a thing, but I struggle with it anyway. So I think I try to meet people where they are, and if they're open, then I'll give you everything I've got, and that has paid off more with the witnesses that I work with than really with the lawyers. I have witnesses whose cases are over, and they still text me, and they're like, "Hey, I was thinking about getting a book on this topic. Can you help me?" So I stay open to that. But a person is where it's only going to be frustrating for me and for them if I'm going to try to kick them down the road to consciousness. So I don't think that's going to work too well.
Yeah, I think Abraham Hicks says that what other people do around you, what your environment looks like, it's none of your business.
Right.
The only thing you have control of is your reaction to it.
That's right.
That was a great answer. Great answer. So where do you see yourself with law in the next 5 to 10 years? And how do you evolve from where you are today in terms of your goals, your wishes, your desires to take your practice to another level?
Wow. I think I'm going to answer that in context. And I will say, I feel very fortunate to, I'm currently president-elect for the Arizona Trial Lawyers Association. Right. And I'm super excited about that because we haven't had a woman president in about 20 years, maybe longer. I didn't exactly go back and count. It's been a long time since we've had a woman in this post. And I'm in this post because I had a colleague of mine who almost 10 years ago said, you have to do this. You have to be on the board. You have to be more active. We don't have enough women. We don't have enough minority women. And you owe it to the women who come after you. And that did it. That's taught me that I needed to be more active and to take a role, because I didn't have those mentors when I was younger. I didn't have other females reaching out to me and saying, hey, I'm available. So as much as I'm thankful and so grateful for my male colleagues who took the time to make me a better trial lawyer, I would like to be that female for other women. Yeah. So in this post as president, I think I would like to address that the changing practice of law. Arizona just went from one of the most conservative states on attorney fee sharing to probably the most liberal, where now we will allow for non-lawyer owned law firms. There are referral fees permitted. And I've been seeing for 4 years the writing on the wall, because we don't have caps on damages. We're going to be seeing a huge influx of not only advertising firms, but large firms from out of state, the call centers that are going to pretty much, I feel, I hate to say this, but I've been saying it to my colleagues, that I think the solos like us we're not going to be around much longer. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can afford to compete with the kinds of advertising and solicitation dollars that are out there. I think it's absurd to even try. I stopped any kind of marketing effort years ago. And word of mouth on big cases and referrals it's still possible. I've been practicing for over 20 years, but we are rapidly changing into a lot of the other states, like California and Texas, that have a lot of lawyer advertising. And so we're going to have to rethink the business of law. And while I tend to agree with Joe Fried that hiring practice managers and that type of thing is really important, it has to be done in the context of seeing this as a very changing field, because the larger firms they're going to be present in your state if they're not already. And there are certainly, I think it's going to divide very sharply into the numbers, mid-range advertising firms that just do high volume. And then there's going to be the prestigious firms that everybody knows their names because they're nationwide and they've got whatever billions of dollars of recovery. And then there will be a few at the bottom who are, ideally still thriving. But I think for the most part, other practices are going to have to look into developing other practice areas. Or, I'm sort of in this myself. I feel a little bit more fortunate because I have consulting, and and I get a lot of my cases. I get brought in on other people's cases because they recognize that I have a background in traumatic brain injury, and they want the benefit of that. So I'm being brought in on other cases, not just in Arizona, but out of state. So I feel like I'm less impacted, but I'm deeply concerned for the small and solo practitioners, because I think it's going to look a lot different.
Yeah, I mean,
for myself.
Right.
Sorry, I was just thinking, for myself, I really don't know. I mean, I love the consulting. I want to continue that, for a few more years. Certainly I see myself doing this for a long time. I love it. But I think a lot of it, again, even my growth is going to have to be considered in the changing practice of the plaintiff's bar.
Yeah, no, I, as you know, I travel the country and I hear concerns like this in a lot of states. And in fact, there's a lot of young lawyers that I work with that not only think that there is a need to reinvent themselves because there is so many big advertisers, especially like in Florida, you know, you've got 2 to 3 firms that like own 80% of the market, right? And then you have everybody else just trying to compete for the rest of the business. And so there is a lot of that going on. But also I think when somebody is good and they truly are in it for the right reasons, that the work always comes, you know, and so as long as you're doing what you're doing with passion and you're invested in the best interest of your client, I think people seek out the attorneys who are taking the time. They're not just, you know, a number or part of the mill. They're very much focused on client care and they give them the respect that they need. And I think that will never go away, no matter how much money enters, I think, the space and the advertising takes place. But the other thing that's interesting that I've heard lawyers talk about is, you know, really diversifying the practice area that they're in, you know, today. And one example is to get into other practice areas like mass torts. And I do work in mass torts, and I see a lot of single event attorneys show up to a lot of our events now because they need to change. They want to learn something new. And it's an exciting world where things are moving very fast. The landscape is changing constantly, but then also that there is a lot of potential for making money in a way that you wouldn't see the cash flow come in if you were just practicing single event cases. So I think in all of the crises, right, people do find ways. Sometimes they're forced to find innovative ways to stay in business and do things a little differently. So with Arizona changing the laws and Utah changing the laws, there is no doubt in my mind that a lot of money will come into the state and they will try to take over. I guess it remains to be seen what lawyers, you know, solo practitioners will do to kind of, you know, reinvent themselves and shift themselves to have another focus where they're not only still very needed and necessary, but the work that they do is also just as impactful. So if not more impactful, you know.
Well, and that kind of dovetails on a second point that I'm hoping to make part of my platform as the new president, and that is women in the law. And I think this is a really great opportunity for women. I've been saying for years that we need to be referring cases to each other, that we need to be trying more cases, that we need to be trying more cases together, that we need to be forming alliances that aren't, you know, maybe they're partnerships, maybe they're not. But, you know, we've been screaming for years about needing the, you know, time, you know, partnership roles, and it's long overdue. The numbers of women who enter the practice is over 50% most years, and those who are represented in large firms and, you know, as partners, and certainly this is true in the plaintiff practices. I mean, it's dismal. And it's really, really unfortunate. I see a lot of women lawyers, second chair, third chair in these trials, and it's time for that to change. And so I would say what I look at it as an advantage to being a woman in this changing landscape, because I think this is really a time that we can bring something different to the table, not just in terms of client advocacy and representation, but also in terms of firm formation and structure. We are, you know, we have children, we have obligations as parents that fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how they look at it, our male counterparts don't necessarily have. And And so I think we have the ability to form partnerships and alliances that don't look like traditional law firms where you just go 8 to 5. You know, I know for myself, I did a whole lot of work when my kids were at home after they were in bed, you know, and nobody cared in my firm, you know. I was married to the partner. So, I mean, but it was such a tremendous advantage to me to be able to do that. And since having that exposure, I know that it's made such a difference for me in terms of wanting other women to experience that and afford it to each other. Let's let partnerships or let's let law firms look differently for us than they do for men. Let's have different work hours available. We've done it in the business sector, but law firms still kind of operate in a really traditional sort of male formulated structure. And I think it's time for that to change.
So how should women rethink how they practice? What has to change? Because I'm a woman in this business, and I think there is a lot of advantages to being a woman. We are creative, we are nurturing, we are, you know, we do it all, we multitask. So what needs to change with the way women think about their position in the law firms and, you know, in other, you know, practice areas?
I think it's time for women to start demanding a lead trial role rather than, you know, first chair and all you do are damages. You know, I'm a little tired of that role. And I've done all these things myself. You know, I've been second chair. I've been third chair. And it's, you know, as much as I respect my male counterparts, I think women need to be more upfront about their role as lead counsel on various cases. I think we also need to challenge the traditional workday as being 8 to 5. I know courts are only going to, you know, be open from 9 to 5, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when our workday has to be. And I think Zoom and COVID, if there was one benefit, it's that it forced everybody to realize how commuter friendly or home friendly we can be, home office friendly we can be, and still get a tremendous amount of work done. And so I think those are some things that we can really use to our advantage. If we just rethink the way, you know, it's kind of been set up by our male colleagues, which no offense to them, but it doesn't fit for us.
It doesn't work for women. I agree. Yeah. I mean, I think part of this also process, because I actually met some young women lawyer in Houston, Texas, when we were there for a seminar. And, you know, they really weren't thinking along the lines. I was encouraging them to get into mass torts and take some chances and, you know, create joint ventures and be entrepreneur in the way that they think about business. Is not just don't get just stuck in the tunnel where you are just doing the same thing over and over again. So to think, and it was a conversation. It was like they had never had that conversation before. They had never thought that. So I find that it's so important what you're doing and what Trial Structures is doing. I know Alejandro preaches this, is to bring more women in, but also to educate women, those who haven't made that realization, to find their voice and to be authentic in the way that they live their life, so that they can be more daring and they can go after bigger things and not allow any set or mindset limit the way that they think. I mean, there was a time that I used to think I was never going to make more than a certain amount of money. I really believed that. And I thought I was capped. If I could make that I would be out of survival and I would be fine. I'd be happy with that. And then I realized after I got there and I got my goal, my wish, that I would die if I was going to stop growing, right? Because it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about me overcoming myself and my limitations and how I thought about me. And so then I moved the cheese a little bit more. And so I started to think, oh my gosh, all of this is in my head. All these limitations like you said, taking ownership and responsibility for who we are and how we think. And though absolutely we've been set back, in many ways, because like you said, the traditional ways have been done by our counterparts, but I think there is a way to break that. And gosh, I encourage women to start their own law firms and, to do their own thing, try it. And I have never met someone that started their own practice and regretted it, even if they weren't making, incredible amounts of money and were successful. They were living life in their own terms. And I think that is taking power back and realizing it is nobody's fault. It is your decision in that moment on how you want the rest of your life to unfold. And so really truly empowering professionals, not just lawyers, but just women in general who are kind of stuck in some mindsets that this is how they think their life is going to be.
Right. Yeah, I love that. Everything you said, it's 100%. I'm in agreement.
Yeah. So, it's, I think this platform, I do, sometimes I struggle with finding women to bring on this podcast because I know a lot of lawyers and I'm
We're the unicorns.
But it's the best time because I can truly feel I connect on a different level, which is the feminine energy. And that's another thing, by the way, talking about feminine and masculine energy and how we can be masters of that, because we can take control of things on a dime, but we can also be very feminine and very, very nurturing in our ways. And we can get our way every time. It's just knowing the power in that.
100%. And one of the things, Alejandro is very well versed in a lot of the Jungian writings on masculinity and femininity. And I had some of that from my background as well. But that's really helped me to understand, because I have a very strong, what people would call masculine side. A lot of my emotional development, I would say, is probably very more traditionally masculine. And I think a lot of it is because of the profession that I'm in, right? Yeah. Like, is that sort of, you're sort of groomed to, even if you don't like a man, you have to act like one in some ways, and dialing that back and being able to balance it with a more feminine energy, and to be able to share that and bring nurturing things to the table that I wasn't really nurturing and fostering myself. Now I can share that with other women, but also with other men, and vice versa. So it's all a balance of, these masculine and feminine energies. I don't want to make it, course on Jungian psychology, but
I love this stuff. This is what I'm for.
But there is a lot of that, and I think a lot of women, I know I did struggle with trying to balance who we think we have to be with, also trying to be mothers and be nurturing, but there is a way to integrate those roles within ourselves. And I think if trial structure and particularly my studies with Blanco have taught me anything, it's that that integration is possible, so that we're not, you said something earlier about, sort of struggling and, trying to find that balance. And sometimes you have to be deeply masculine. Sometimes you have to be deeply feminine. And when I say that, I'm talking energetically. I don't mean, I don't mean something superficial on the outside, but you rely on those traditional notions of energetic forces, but there's a way to have them operate so that it's smooth. It's like the Tao symbol, that's in motion. That's a balance of masculine and feminine, of dark and light. And I think I'm starting to understand how those two things come together and how I can use both aspects of myself. I don't really have to be one or the other. I'm as I need to be in whatever moment I'm called to be that.
Yeah. That's amazing. So I want to shift gears because I do have a question about, and I don't know if you want to expand on this or talk about it at all, but experimenting with things like DMT or mushrooms. You're deeply spiritual. I'm deeply spiritual. Do you have any experience with that stuff? I mean, I'm just really curious about the topic.
Well, I'll tell you that the answer is yes. I'll tell you that in that period of time that I felt so insane, it wasn't isolated to just that period with my daughters. I had another episode, I would say probably 6 or 7 years ago. And I was always somebody who was, anti everything. I even though grew up on the border, had never even tried any kind of prohibited substance or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in a lot of my meditation studies and doing sweat lodges and sleeping outside and doing some of the, I was doing like midnight hikes at 2 a.m. at, Bell Rock and Sedona, and things I probably wouldn't recommend to the average person. I had a guide. I had my romantic partner at the time was a very deeply spiritual human and introduced me to an Apache shaman and to people across the border. We met many people who introduced me to things like psilocybin, and those experiences were, massively transformative for me. Some things that I'd had in my past in terms of trauma where I was finally able to deal with them in a way that I don't think, and this is I never really gave therapy a long shot. I know I have friends who've been in therapy for, 10 or more years, and, they would, I'm sure, say very different things, but my experience with therapy wasn't particularly healing. But when I had those deeply meditative experiences, they changed me. They literally changed my outlook on life. And what I tell people about those experiences are that I would not recommend that you do it without a guide, because the process of learning the sacredness behind why these are helpful to us in life really comes from knowledge and experience. And I think a lot of things like psilocybin and LSD, like they started, at least the experimentation in the 60s with a good intention of, expanding people's consciousness and their notions of being and existence and, awareness and all of those things. And actually, there's a phenomenal book, and you and I talked about this, but I'm going to mention it just because I flipping love this book. It's called The Immortality Key. It's by a guy named Brian Murarescu, who is also a lawyer. He's never done any kind of drug experimentation himself, but he picked up the work of another scholar who had investigated the use of psychedelic substances in antiquity, and that the wines that a lot of the Greeks were using in early rituals, well, and not just the Greeks, there studies a number, it's different cultures and civilizations he mentions in the book. It's very, very well researched. And it talks a lot about, the historical and what's the field, archaeological chemistry that is now emerging to actually prove out that, these substances were used in sacred rituals. And so for me, it helps to know that if you've got someone who knows and can set a sacred space, who can teach you and help guide you through whatever your experience may be, that's different than like what we sort of had with the drug revolution, where people are just, taking substances as an escape, basically, and not really utilizing the information and integrating it to change themselves. And that's why I think it's unfortunate that, a lot of these, natural plants, especially the psilocybin, the psychedelic mushrooms, it's unfortunate that they're regulated still in so many states, because they are, in the right circumstances and in the right mindset with the right intention, are transformative beyond words.
Yeah, and I think there is stigma associated with these substances, and If people do it, people don't really talk about it, especially in our profession. You know, people have to be very careful with what they say, especially on the record. But, you know, I really appreciate your openness, because I think that's the message I really was hoping to send, and I'm hoping to send to people that are tuned into this, is that this search for self-discovery isn't one size fits all. I mean, everybody takes their own course. We're all influenced by the people, by energies that are around us. And I think as long as your intention is to seek a higher truth for yourself and for what you're doing, then being open-minded to trying things and doing things outside of the box in order for you to bring your best self in really any aspect of your life is to deepen your understanding of who you are and why you're here. You know, I had an attorney on a podcast a week ago, which hasn't aired yet, but he said, it's Mike Papantonio, and he's a big mass tort attorney that, you know, represents thousands and thousands of people. He said, when I'm hiring new lawyers, I ask them, you know, the books that made the most impact, you know, and, you know, sometimes he said people they don't know who Kafka is or Carl Jung, or they have never done any self exploration. And he said, in order to be a great lawyer, you have to be adventurous. You have to try a lot. You have to be open to everything, because the people that you're going to encounter in your practice, the people that you're going to represent, those are people that have had probably a very, you know, a very colorful life. And unless you understand who they are, you can't possibly represent them correctly.
Right.
And so his suggestion or recommendation, or what I took away from it, is to have hobbies and be in nature and be passionate and do things that make you feel good. And you can take those feelings and channel them in your case, in your work. And it makes a difference in the quality of the life that you live and the results that you get for your clients. And I thought, wow, I mean, it's sort of the same thing we were talking about, just said in a different way. So go find a hobby, get excited about something, find a good book.
Right. Right. I joke that because one of the things I love to do is write, but I keep saying I have to wait until the statute of limitations runs out before I can try to get it published. But I agree with that. I mean, the one thing I think, if I've learned anything at all from my journey in consciousness, is that life is happening, you know, and while you're busy working, and, you know, as rewarding as you may find your clients and your practice, and it's your calling, you know, that life offers so many other things. And so many of those other things came into my life when I started spending time outside, when I started, I kill notoriously, I'm sorry to my clients, I kill everything. I really try to have, I finally now, for the first time in my life, I have green around me that I haven't killed. But, you know, like trying those very simple things and staying engaged. And my ex-partner introduced me to the movie Yes Man, you know, where he has to say yes to everything. And he finds himself in these crazy, you know, situations. And I sort of lived that, because I did. Sometimes I was looking around at where I am and I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing? And it turned out to be some of the most remarkable experiences of my life. So, you know, say yes more often, you know.
Oh, the being in the unknown. So that's something I'm working on right now, is to be okay with the unknown, that I don't need to predict, because I am a little bit of a control freak. I need to predict what's going to happen, because I need to have control of my life somehow, or so I think, especially with kids, and they need that in their lives. And so I try to do that, but then it ends up, I am very predictable, and then I become boring to myself. And one of the things I hate the most is status quo and not changing things up. I mean, I really think live the most when I'm not predicting and I don't know what's going to happen. It's just being the unknown.
Yeah, that's true. It's very true. I think I had like four thoughts kind of hit my head at the same time. You know, when you start, one of the most limiting things I think I found being single in my mid 40s was kind of interesting as I started dating, but what I found was a lot of people that I was encountering would say things like, "Oh, I can't do that. That's just not the way I am."
Right.
And what I found is that I have a very deep growth mindset. Where that came from, I don't know if it's always been there or if it's gotten stronger over the years, but
it's something you can cultivate.
Yeah, absolutely. Those words I hope to never utter. That's just the way I am, because I hope that the way I am is constantly in flux and constantly changing, and that's how I look at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, that's beautiful. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for days.
Well, we do, which is kind of nice, but when we have time.
Yeah, no, and I want to continue this conversation. I mean, I've had a variation of this conversation with a lot of lawyers on this podcast, but I think you and I have sort of tuned into, certain teachings, contemporary teachings about learning who we are and, evolving and understanding to be kind to ourselves, and that this is a constant moving target. And so just to have that growth mindset. So it's very refreshing for me. It feeds my soul to have these conversations, which honestly was the reason why I started this podcast in the first place. So I put this out there and I said, let's just see what happens. And I swear every experience, every person I talk to has enriched me and my human experience in the most profound way. So I thank you for being part of it. I thank you for making time to be on this podcast today. And I want to continue this conversation at another time. Maybe we have a panel and we bring in more people and we talk about our life journey and how to, slowly help each other evolve and develop and progress into better, versions of ourselves.
I would certainly welcome that opportunity. I don't think there's enough of it in the practice of law. I mean, there's a lot of talk about be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. Nobody really talks to you about how to do that. And they talk about loving yourself. And nobody taught me. I mean, everyone just said you're supposed to do it. And this outward sort of I look good. I'm smart enough. It's the Saturday Night Live character. She's escaping me. That Tina Fey used to play. And gosh darn it, people like me. That's good. I don't want to sort of rip on that, because I think it's better than nothing. Right. I think it's better than being negative and downer all the time. And, always like non-growth mindset, anti-growth mindset people. It's better than that, but it's not as good as the real thing. It's not as good. And I'm still that work in progress. I still have a lot of days where my negative self-talk, my inner critic is so incredibly loud that I wrestle with that. So I know that we all do, and we're never ever going to be rid of that critic, but the critic is there to serve a useful function. And if we can learn again to integrate that as part of our process and be less judgmental, not only of others, but of ourselves, and then make room for that self-love. That's the biggest thing. Most of us don't have any room for the love. We just reject it. We're like, no, I can't, I'm not lovable. There's something about me that's not lovable. And it's not true. It's a lie. The Course in Miracles calls it I'm blanking on it now. It's something like the tiny mad idea is what this Course in Miracle calls it. And that is that you yourself are separate from your highest self, from your God self, from the highest consciousness that you can be, that we're somehow different. And that separation causes all of that that dissatisfaction. And the more we go on pretending, wearing these masks, being a perfect mom, being a perfect parent, being all of these things, the more distant we get from our authentic self. Well, no one tells you how to get back to that.
Yeah.
And no one in the law anyway. And I think a lot of it is they don't really know how. They just tell you, these are the things I did, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you yourself will get there. But I think communities like this, conversations like this are hugely important. That if we could just drop the facade that everything's perfect and everything's going the way we want it to, that we can actually, again, have that communion and help foster this in a profession that needs it. Because as the profession changes, those of us who want to thrive, because this is our alchemical furnace, we need it. We need it to survive. We need it to nurture our spirit. Otherwise, what's the point? There, you know, the money, if it's there, it's nice, but it's not that fulfilling aspect of self. And that's what I think true seekers really want.
Yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Is it better to love or to be loved?
Always better to love. But I'd have to qualify that with, I think, I can't give a short answer, right? I have to qualify that by saying, I think it's impossible to love until you have self-love. We look at love like it's a commodity. It's this thing you can give and take away, right? Our kids are good. And so we reward them, we give them nice things, and then they're bad and we take it away. Or we've had that done to us as children. And as parents, we think that that's a good thing. It's how we teach our children to behave. Unfortunately, it teaches us that love is this thing. Oh, we're together, so I love you. And now we're divorced, so now I hate you, or I don't like you, or I don't love you. And the truth is, love is, I think of it as like a swimming pool, right? Like you're in it, and maybe some people get in it with you, and maybe they don't. But most people are busy scooping water out of the swimming pool of love and splashing it on each other, you know, and that's situational. So when you are able to love you truly love everybody. And let me just finish with this. Miguel Ruiz wrote a book that also changed my life. It was called Mastery of Love. It's this big, it's tiny. You can read it in a weekend. I highly, highly recommend it. It's one of the best books I've ever read. But he talks about this thing called the magic kitchen. And in the kitchen, you can have anything you want. You open the fridge and abundance of all your favorite food. You open the oven, same thing. At any time you walk into this kitchen and it's always there. And there's never any fear that you're going to be short. So when people come over, you give them, you share, and you sit down and you feast at your magic kitchen. And one day your doorbell rings and there's a person standing there who says, oh, I have this pizza for you. It's a really delicious pizza. And if you do A, B, and C for me, I'll give you my pizza. Mm-hmm. If you have a magic kitchen, why on earth would you take, why would you have to, in fact, you would say to the person, well, you know what, why don't you come in and sit down? Because I've got nothing but food. You don't have to do anything for it. And that's his analogy for love. And when I read that book, I thought that's impossible. It's impossible to love people who don't love you back. It's impossible to love people you don't like. It's impossible to love your exes, whatever I had in my mind. And I can say now on this side where I have begun that journey of loving myself, it's easy to love other people, even when you don't like them. Even when you have to say you are toxic, you need to be out of my life, you send them away with a deep love and a deep gratitude and appreciation. So when I say give love, it's because it's already in you. It's already you. You are that love. So it's not like you need it back. You have it.
Well, thank you for the wisdom, Guru Ilya.
Oh God, no, not even close. But thanks.
No, but seriously, this feels. This is so good. This is so good. And thank you, because every word and every conversation, every answer spoke to me, and it elevated me just a little bit more.
Oh, I love it.
Before we met or we talked. So thank you again for making the time and for growing together. I appreciate you more than I can say.
100%. It's equal, as we say in Spanish, igual on my side. So thank you. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you, counting you now among my friends on a conscious path. I absolutely love it. And the fact that we're both, in this aspect of law that deeply needs it. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm so happy to have found you.
Same here.
Take care.